The midnight flight from Bagram Airfield had been delayed 3 times before finally touching down on American soil. Master Sergeant James Cooper sat rigid in his seat, the hypervigilance ingrained from 4 combat tours still keeping his senses sharp despite going 36 hours without sleep. His tactical watch read 1937 hours almost, 2 full days since his commanding officer had approved his emergency leave request after the successful completion of their high-risk extraction mission in the Korengal Valley. "Wheels down, Cooper," Captain Rodriguez said from the seat beside him. "Bet Sarah doesn't even know you're stateside yet." James nodded, one hand unconsciously checking his chest where the bronze star from his last tour sat carefully wrapped in his rucksack. Thought about calling from Qatar, but wanted to surprise her. His voice carried the measured tone of a man accustomed to controlling his emotions through the most extreme situations. Then gone 11 months, 3 weeks, 4 days. The aircraft taxied to a halt, and James moved with the efficient economy of motion that had kept him alive through firefights in 3 different countries. His rucksack contained everything essential: tactical gear minimized, civilian clothes precisely folded, the small velvet box containing the replacement wedding band he'd promised Sarah after she'd complained her original was too small following Emma's birth. Outside Hartsfield-Jackson, James secured transportation with the same methodical precision he applied to all operations. The driver, noting his military bearing and haircut, attempted conversation about deployments and service, but James maintained his operational security. He offered only the necessary acknowledgement to not appear rude. His mind was already mapping the approach to his house in Lawrenceville, calculating arrival time, visualizing the layout as he'd left it 357 days ago. The modest 2-story colonial came into view at 2,142 hours. James noted multiple deviations from expected patterns immediately. Unfamiliar sedan in the driveway, multiple lights active on the ground floor despite Emma's standard 2,000 hours bedtime protocol. Absence of the porch light, Sarah habitually left on during his deployments. "Want me to wait, sir?" the driver asked, sensing his passenger's sudden tension. "Negative," James responded automatically, his go-bag already over his shoulder, eyes performing a tactical assessment of the property. "I'm good here." The security system was disarmed, another deviation from protocol. Sarah had promised after the last home invasion 3 blocks over that she'd maintain strict adherence to security procedures during his absence. James moved silently across the lawn, years of close-quarters training taking over as he approached. The darkened side of the house dot through the kitchen window. He observed initial indicators that conflicted with expected household patterns: multiple wine glasses on the counter, a men's jacket on the chair that wasn't his size or style, Sarah's. Laughter carrying from the living room. This was a tonal quality he hadn't heard directed at him in years. James circled to position himself with line of sight into the living room, his breath held steady as his training took over. The same controlled breathing that had kept his snipers scope from fogging during a snowstorm outside Kabul when his spotter took enemy fire. The tactical advantage of the bay window provided 87% visual coverage of the room's interior. Sarah sat on the couch, her body language displaying intimate comfort, with the male subject beside her. James's cognitive processing momentarily stalled as recognition registered. Michael Taylor, his wife's brother, his own brother-in-law, the prosecutor, the family's golden boy. The man whose wife Lisa had been consoled by James multiple times when Michael worked late nights at the office. Their posture displayed no familial relationship. The intimate contact, the casual disregard for operational security in the wide-open windows. They weren't concerned about discovery. The kiss that followed confirmed James's tactical assessment. With crushing finality, something in James went silent. The same deadly quiet that descended when his team had been ambushed outside Kandahar, and 2 of his men went down in the first 3 seconds. His mind compartmentalized instantly, emotions secured behind the same mental barriers that had allowed him to function through the worst combat scenarios. James Cooper did not slam doors or shatter windows. He did not announce his presence with emotional declarations. 15 years of special operations had taught him that superior intelligence and positional advantage determine successful outcomes, not emotional reactions. He withdrew to his previous position at the side of the house, retrieving his phone and activating the recording function. He spent exactly 27 minutes documenting entry and exit points, conversation patterns, and physical interactions, visible through various sightlines of the property. At 2,246 hours, Master Sergeant James Cooper departed his target observation post without detection. In his mind, the home was no longer his residence, but rather an objective requiring comprehensive tactical assessment and strategic response. His mission parameters had just fundamentally changed, and like every operation he'd ever commanded, this one would require perfect execution based on superior intelligence and disciplined implementation. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a tactical situation requiring a strategic solution. And if there was one thing James Cooper understood better than most civilians could comprehend, it was how to strategically dismantle an entrenched enemy position. Silence filled the rental car as James Cooper drove toward the bank, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. 24 hours since discovery. 18 since Sarah had screamed her final accusations before storming out. 12 since the numbing realization that his 12-year marriage had been a tactical deception. Combat operations in Kandahar had taught him to compartmentalize, assess, analyze, survive. First objective, financial reconnaissance. The bank manager's expression told him everything before the screen did. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper, but your joint accounts have been significantly altered. Show me." James's voice carried the calm precision that had kept his unit alive during ambush. The numbers confirmed his worst tactical assessment. Primary savings, 0. Investment portfolio, liquidated. Checking account, $172.38 remaining from what should have been $23,000. Classic financial ambush, executed with precision timing during his deployment. When were these withdrawals made? James maintained his professional demeanor, the same one he'd used when interrogating hostiles with critical intelligence. The large transfers began approximately 23 months ago. Final liquidation occurred 3 days before your return. 2 years. The affair had lasted 2 years. James processed this intelligence while maintaining his external composure. His special forces training activated automatically. He kept his face neutral and breathing controlled as his mind calculated angles and vulnerabilities. "I'd like complete transaction records. Every withdrawal, every transfer, all destination accounts." The manager hesitated. "Sir, as a joint account holder, your wife had full legal. I understand that. I'm requesting documentation, not accusations." Now, for the second objective, property assessment. The county records office revealed the next phase of the strategic attack against him. 4 mortgage refinances in 18 months, each with his signature, each during his deployment, each funneling equity from their home. Forensic analysis would later confirm what he already knew: forgeries, expertly executed. "Could I get certified copies of these documents?" James asked, his voice maintaining the same measured tone he'd used when calling in coordinates under enemy fire. Tactical assessment. This was no impulsive betrayal. This was a coordinated campaign, executed with military precision. Sarah and Michael had planned their financial extraction operation with the patience of experienced operatives, establishing deep cover. Third objective, communications intelligence. Back in his rental car, James connected his laptop to secure military-grade encryption software, a gift from his unit's tech specialist. For when you need to dig without leaving footprints, Captain. The email recovery took 17 minutes. The deleted message archive from Sarah's account revealed operational details that confirmed his assessment: a systematic conspiracy between his wife and brother-in-law. Michael, James's deployment extension gives us the perfect window to move the last accounts. He'll never notice with the time difference and limited communication. Dated 3 months ago. Already filed the paperwork on the final mortgage. My contact at the bank won't flag the signature verification. 2 months ago. Once we're clear, we'll have enough to start over somewhere he'll never find us. 6 weeks ago. His PTSD story is already established with friends. Nobody will question when I leave with Emma for safety reasons. 4 weeks ago. The tactical implications crystallized. This wasn't just financial extraction. This was the groundwork for custody warfare. The calculated positioning of assets before a final devastating strike. James felt the cold clarity he'd experienced in Fallujah when his unit was surrounded. Outnumbered, outgunned, but never outhought. He'd led every man out alive through strategic thinking and disciplined execution. And the final objective of the day? Establish a secure operating base. James drove to the extended stay hotel, paid cash for 2 weeks, and set up his tactical command center. Laptop, secure phone, documents spread in precise order. The same methodical approach he'd used planning extraction operations behind enemy lines. On the wall, he placed a single photograph of Emma, his 7-year-old daughter. The primary objective of any future operations. The one non-negotiable asset he would recover. At all costs. Combat assessment complete. Sarah and Michael had spent 2 years executing their campaign. They'd seized financial territory, established tactical high ground, and prepared for the final objective, taking Emma while destroying his ability to respond. They'd planned meticulously, operated with precision, and timed their strikes for maximum effect. But they'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. They were facing a veteran who had survived worse ambushes in combat zones across 3 continents. A special forces captain who specialized in turning tactical disadvantages into strategic victories. James Cooper loaded a fresh page in his tactical notebook and wrote 3 words at the top: mission planning, begin. For a man still no sleep. James Cooper stared at the ceiling of the cheap motel room, the shadows playing across water-stained tiles like enemy movements in mountain terrain. 3 weeks since discovery. 21 days of systematic destruction. His tactical watch glowed. In the darkness, the same one that had guided him through night operations in Kandahar. The irony wasn't lost on him. He survived 3 combat tours only to be ambushed on home soil. The bank statements lay scattered across the bed, each page a documentation of strategic financial sabotage. Sarah had executed her extraction plan with military precision. Joint accounts emptied, retirement funds transferred, credit cards maxed. The mortgage doubled through a home equity line he'd never signed for. Classic scorched earth tactics. James's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Court hearing moved up. Emergency custody proceeding tomorrow. Michael's influence as county prosecutor made itself felt. Tactical advantage. Opposition. Sergeant Cooper, you need to understand the gravity of the situation. His attorney had explained yesterday, voice measured but concerned. Your wife's claiming your combat experience has made you unstable. She's filed a temporary restraining order citing PTSD-related aggression. Your brother-in-law has significant influence with family court Judge Harmon. The thin walls of the motel carried the sounds of a couple arguing next door. James tuned it out, compartmentalizing like he'd been trained. Focus on the mission. Protect assets. Establish a secure position. Identify resources. His phone rang. A call from Captain Rodriguez, his former commanding officer. Cooper, you still breathing? Rodriguez's voice carried the gruff concern of someone who'd pulled wounded men. From burning Humvees. Affirmative, sir. Compromised but operational. Don't sir me, we're civilians now. Listen, Emma needs her father. Sarah's playing psychological warfare. You need to engage tactical discipline, not emotional response. James moved to the window, checking sight lines out of habit. The motel parking lot was empty except for his 2010 Jeep, the only vehicle Sarah hadn't managed to leverage against him. In the distance, dawn began breaking over the city skyline. Michael filed for emergency psychological evaluation yesterday, James said, his voice controlled despite the rage building beneath. Claims I exhibited threatening behavior during supervised visitation with Emma. It's fabricated, but the judge granted the order. Classic insurgent tactics, creating false intelligence to compromise your position, Rodriguez replied. What's your countermeasure? The Veterans Crisis Counselor had called it catastrophic destabilization, the complete undermining of a combat veteran support systems during reintegration. James had seen it happen to others. Never thought it would be his own wife orchestrating the attack. Emma's voice echoed in his memory. When are you coming home, Daddy? She asked during their last video call before Sarah blocked all contact. His 6-year-old daughter's face still showed traces of the chalk dust from her kindergarten art project. Collateral damage was unacceptable. At the courthouse yesterday, Michael had smirked as he passed in the hallway, adjusting his expensive tie. Just trying to protect my sister from a clearly unstable individual. Your combat experiences have obviously affected your perception of reality. James. The psychological evaluation was scheduled for 900. Sarah's attorney had already submitted affidavits from concerned neighbors who had witnessed erratic behavior. Tactical position, severely compromised. James methodically gathered the financial documents, organizing them in his mission folder. The Veterans Support Group met at 0700. Former Master Sergeant Wilson had mentioned connections with the state attorney general's office. Potential resource. The first light of dawn touched the horizon as James ran through his mental checklist. Today's objectives: attend psych evaluation, document all interactions, establish a baseline at the Veterans Support Group, secure communications with Emma's teacher, begin intelligence gathering on Michael's case history. His military training had taught him that even when surrounded, cut off from support, and outgunned, surrender was never the only option. Sometimes the path to victory required absorbing initial losses, gathering intelligence, and planning the counteroffensive with cold precision. James Cooper stood by the motel window, watching the sun rise over a battlefield he never expected to fight on. But this was one he refused to lose. The mission parameters had changed, but the core objective remained the same: protect what matters most. Emma was worth every battle to come. The morning light cast long shadows across James Cooper's sparse apartment as he completed his final push-up, 250, just like in Special Forces training. Sweat dripped onto the bare floor, but his breathing remained controlled. 7 weeks since Discovery Day. 7 weeks since his world collapsed. Now, the fog was finally clearing. Adapt. Overcome. Survive. The Master Sergeant's words from SEER training echoed in his mind. The same principles that kept him alive behind enemy lines in Kandahar would get him through this domestic ambush. James moved to the kitchen table, where his tactical assessment lay organized in precise military fashion. 3 manila folders labeled financial, legal, and custody. A 4th marked opposition intel contained everything about Sarah and Michael's movements, patterns, and vulnerabilities. Standard reconnaissance protocol, just applied to civilian targets. His phone buzzed. It is Captain Riley Martinez, his former XO from 3rd Group. Cooper. Status report? Implementing Phase 1, sir. Asset assessment and strategic positioning. Riley's voice carried the same command presence it had in combat. Remember your training, Cooper. Tactical patience. Gather intel before engagement. Affirmative. No direct contact with primary targets maintained. 2 weeks earlier, James had nearly broken protocol. Confrontation at Sarah's new residence would have been catastrophically premature. Instead, he'd withdrawn to reassess, just as he'd done when his 12-man team was compromised in Helmand Province. That decision had saved lives. This one would save his future. The wall now held a tactical planning board. Red string connected. Key events and players. Timeline established with military precision. Bank statements, mortgage documents, custody filings. Each represented a different vector of attack from Sarah and Michael's coordinated offensive. James studied the evidence. Methodically. The $217,000 withdrawn from joint accounts during his final deployment. The second mortgage with his forged signature. The calculated character assassination in family. Court documents claiming PTSD-induced volatility. Michael had leveraged his position as assistant district attorney to accelerate proceedings, expedite filings, and manipulate the legal terrain. Classic shock and awe tactics designed to overwhelm and disable the opposition before effective countermeasures could be deployed. What they hadn't counted on was James's training dot in the corner. A secure laptop connected to his military network displayed a message from Sergeant Torres, now working in digital forensics. Financial trace complete. Offshore account identified. Sending encrypted details now, James nodded. Intelligence gathering phase proceeding according to mission parameters. The disciplined approach was yielding results that emotional reactions never would. He opened his journal, making precise entries in the same format he'd used for mission debriefs. Documentation was critical. Every conversation, every legal maneuver, every financial discovery recorded with timestamps and supporting evidence. The custody situation remained his highest priority objective. 7-year-old Emma was being used as both a human shield and psychological weapon. Sarah's calculated limitation of his visitation, combined with whispered poison about Daddy's dangerous problems, represented textbook psychological operations against a vulnerable civilian target. Unacceptable, but not unfixable, James reviewed the mission parameters he'd established during his lowest point 3 weeks ago. Primary objective: secure Emma's safety and future. Secondary: neutralize legal and financial threats. Tertiary: expose opposition's methods and motives to relevant authorities. Revenge was not on the list. Special Forces operators didn't seek revenge. They achieved objectives through superior strategy, disciplined execution, and precise application of available resources. The wall calendar showed his next supervised visitation with Emma, 4 days from now. The first opportunity to assess her psychological state directly and begin strategic counter-programming against Sarah's narrative. "Daddy, are you sick in your head?" Emma's question from their last visit had nearly broken his operational composure. But he'd maintained discipline, explaining carefully that sometimes adults don't tell the truth when they're angry. The small nod of understanding had been his first tactical victory. His phone buzzed again. Now it is from Lieutenant Wilson from J. Agadogors. "Cooper. Found something in the custody filings. Clear procedural violations. Meeting tomorrow at 0900, confirmed. Will bring full documentation." James returned to his tactical board, adding the new information. The counteroffensive was taking shape. Unlike Sarah and Michael's emotional, reactive approach, his would be methodical, evidence-based, and strategically sound. In Afghanistan, James had learned that superior firepower meant nothing without strategic application. The opposition currently held positional advantages and greater resources, but they lacked discipline, tactical patience, and proper intelligence assessment. Fatal weaknesses. All of them. James completed his final notation and stood at parade rest, surveying the operational plan taking shape before him. The path forward was becoming clear. Not a path of destruction, but of precision. Not emotional catharsis, but strategic victory. Master Sergeant Williams' words from Advanced Special Operations Training resonated. When everything is chaos around you, military discipline becomes your only reliable weapon. Time to deploy that weapon with surgical precision. Dawn painted the city skyline in shades of gray as James Cooper established his observation post in the coffee shop across from the county courthouse. Through the rain-streaked window, he watched Michael Davidson stride up the courthouse steps, leather briefcase in hand, arrogance evident in every movement. 3 weeks of surveillance had revealed patterns, vulnerabilities, and opportunities that most civilians would miss. But James wasn't a civilian. 12 years in Special Forces had taught him that proper intelligence gathering was the foundation of any successful operation. "Target is on schedule," he murmured into his phone, not because anyone was listening, but because the discipline of communication protocols was ingrained after years of combat operations. On the table before him lay a seemingly innocent notebook, its pages filled with meticulously documented times, dates, and observations. To an outside observer, it might look like the journal of a true crime enthusiast. To James, it was a tactical assessment of his opponent's movements. The intelligence operation had begun 37 days after the initial discovery of Betrayal. The shock had subsided, replaced by the cold, calculating focus that had kept him alive in Kandahar. Emotional responses get you killed, his team leader had drilled into them. Tactical assessment keeps you alive. Those words echoed as he documented Michael's pattern of 2-hour client meetings at the Westlake Motel every Tuesday and Thursday. Meetings that coincided perfectly with a legal assistant's absence from the courthouse. James's laptop contained 4 separate spreadsheets tracking financial anomalies in Michael's cases. As the county's assistant district attorney, Michael had prosecutorial discretion that, when examined through the lens of military intelligence protocols, showed disturbing patterns. Cases dismissed against certain defendants. Plea deals favorable to specific attorneys. Property seizures that vanished from evidence logs. Asset compromised by personal corruption, James had noted in his files. Using the dispassionate language of intelligence reports rather than the burning terminology of a man betrayed by family. His phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Torres, his former reconnaissance teammate now working private security. Financial analysis complete. Documents attached. Multiple offshore transfers identified. James downloaded the files to an encrypted drive, his expression unchanged despite the revelation. The financial intelligence confirmed what tactical assessment had suggested. Michael hadn't just stolen his wife. He'd been systematically stealing from the county for years. The correlation between case dismissals and offshore deposits created a pattern that even the most skeptical investigator would recognize. Multiple vulnerability points identified, he noted in his log, military terminology helping maintain the emotional distance necessary for effective operation planning. At 1300 hours, James relocated to his secondary observation position, a bench in the park near Sarah's new yoga studio. His soon-to-be ex-wife emerged at precisely 14:27, 17 minutes later than her scheduled class end time. The delay corresponded with a call she'd made to a number James had already identified as belonging to Carl Watkins, another married man whose bank accounts showed unexplained withdrawals. Pattern recognition was a military skill that transferred perfectly to civilian intelligence gathering. Sarah's betrayal with Michael wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a behavioral pattern. 3 prior relationships ended under similar circumstances, emotional manipulation followed by financial extraction. The tactical assessment was clear. Sarah targeted financially stable partners, established emotional leverage, then systematically converted shared assets to personal gain. Target exhibits predictable operational patterns, James documented. the military phraseology helping process what would otherwise be unbearable personal pain. By 1600 hours, James had established his third observation post at Emma's school. His daughter's pickup had become a carefully orchestrated battleground, with Sarah frequently forgetting his court-mandated visitation days. Today, he remained out of sight, documenting as Sarah arrived 27 minutes late, engaged in a heated phone conversation while Emma waited alone on the school steps. The school's assistant principal, Mrs. Hernandez, approached Emma with concern evident in her body language. James activated his directional microphone, a tool from his surveillance kit that most civilians wouldn't know how to properly deploy. "This is the third time this week, Mrs. Cooper," Mrs. Hernandez was saying. "We need to discuss these late pickups and Emma's declining participation." "I'm dealing with a difficult divorce," Sarah replied, her practiced victim voice activating. "My husband's military issues have created so much instability." James recorded the conversation, adding it to the 17 similar interactions already documented. The intelligence pattern was clear. Sarah was building a narrative of his instability while demonstrating her own unreliability. In tactical terms, she was creating a smokescreen to mask her own operational failures. Back at his apartment, a strategic position selected for its proximity to all three primary surveillance locations, James updated his intelligence boards. The left wall tracked Michael's professional corruption, the right documented Sarah's manipulation patterns, and the center focused on their coordinated efforts against him. The tactical picture was becoming clearer with each day of intelligence gathering. "Sufficient intelligence acquired for preliminary operation planning," he noted in his log as the room grew dark around him. Military discipline kept him focused where civilian emotion would have led to despair or rage. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. This was about strategic justice, precisely deployed against confirmed hostile actors. His phone vibrated with another message from Torres. "Financial background on judge assigned to your case attached. Found interesting connections to the Davidson family." Another piece of intelligence slotted into place. The battlefield was becoming increasingly well-defined. James stood before his intelligence boards, eyes moving systematically across the documented patterns. In Afghanistan, they called this the kill chain, the process of identifying, tracking, and neutralizing the threat. But James had no interest in physical violence. His targets had nearly destroyed his life through systems manipulation. Justice would come through those same systems, applied with the precision and discipline of a military operation. Phase 1 intelligence gathering nearing completion, he noted in his log. Moving to Phase 2, strategic positioning. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, but James Cooper stood in the glow of revealed truth. A soldier once again in command of the battlefield. Broken men react. Warriors respond. James Cooper had learned this distinction through 3 combat tours with Special Forces, and now those lessons would save what remained of his life. The strategic positioning phase wasn't about emotion. It was about systematically establishing dominance across multiple theaters of operation. James's apartment served as his tactical operations center, walls covered with meticulously organized information. Financial records, legal documents, and surveillance logs filled 3 separate boards. His military laptop, secured with encryption that would make his former intelligence officers proud, contained the digital equivalent of a battle plan. "Asset deployment is your first priority," Captain Marcus Riley advised during their secure call. The former JAG officer had served alongside James in Kandahar and recognized the legal ambush being orchestrated. "Michael's using prosecutor resources for personal vendettas. Classic corruption pattern, but we need documentation." "Already implementing countermeasures," James responded, his voice carrying the measured calm his team had relied on during critical operations. Phase 1 financial security achieved through Veteran Business Network. The Veterans Enterprise Group had moved with military precision once James presented his situation. 3 job offers materialized within 48 hours, all from veteran-owned companies immune to Michael's influence. James selected the cybersecurity position, leveraging his military intelligence background and placing himself in a legally unassailable position. Family court represents our most vulnerable front, James noted, reviewing the custody situation. Board. Emma's photo centered the display, surrounded by school records, counselor reports, and documented visitation interference. Sarah's narrative about my PTSD poses significant risk. That's why we've engaged flanking maneuvers, replied Dr. Stephanie Winters, a VA psychologist specializing in combat veterans. Her official evaluation of James, conducted weekly since the discovery of the betrayal, documented his exceptional stability and coping mechanisms. Your psychological baseline demonstrates textbook resilience response. The court-appointed evaluator receives my reports tomorrow. James moved to the strategic relationship map on his 3rd board. Former colleagues, family connections, and community resources were coded by reliability, influence level, and actionable support capabilities. Michael's professional rivals, 3 assistant district attorneys with personal grievances against him, had been carefully cultivated as intelligence sources. Judge Morrison's clerk confirms Michael improperly accessed your sealed military records, reported Keith Jennings, a paralegal veteran from James's former unit. That's direct misconduct by a prosecutor. I've documented the security breach for when we need it. The tactical communication system James established operated with military efficiency. Secure messaging apps, scheduled check-ins, and information compartmentalization ensured operational security. No emotional outbursts, no threatening messages, no actionable mistakes that Michael could exploit. Emma's teacher submitted her observation report, reported Lisa, James's sister, reviewing her tablet. Documented 7 instances where Emma arrived with incomplete homework and preparation during Sarah's custody days. Also noted 3 instances where Michael picked Emma up instead of Sarah, violating the temporary custody order. James nodded, updating the evidence log with mechanical precision. Financial positioning. Veterans Credit Union approved your secured loan package, confirmed Riley. Housing stability established. Financial recovery plan proceeding on schedule. Sarah's attempts to access your new accounts have been documented and reported. The evening tactical review concluded with assignment updates and timelines. No detail overlooked, no contingency unplanned. James's military training had transformed a chaotic personal disaster into an ordered response mission with clear objectives and execution paths. As his support team departed, James allowed himself 5 minutes by the window, watching the city lights while centering his thoughts. In Afghanistan, he'd learned that emotional control was often the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The same discipline would serve him now. The brother-in-law who had betrayed him, the wife who had decimated his life. They expected an emotional, broken adversary. Instead, they faced something far more dangerous, a methodical Special Forces veteran, executing the most important mission of his life with the full weight of his military training behind every calculated move. James checked his watch. 2,100 hours. Time to review Emma's homework during their scheduled video call. The mission continued, with his daughter's future as the non-negotiable objective. Everything else was simply tactical necessity. 600 hours marked the execution of Operation Disclosure, James Cooper's tactical response timetable unfolding with military precision. The decorated Special Forces veteran moved through his morning routine with the focused calm that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours, coffee, 2 eggs, review of operational parameters, final checks on digital evidence packages. Today was the day Michael and Sarah would learn the cost of betrayal. Execution phase commencing, James murmured to himself, a habit from mission comms that never quite faded. His laptop displayed 5 email threads, each representing a strategic target in the prosecutor's office hierarchy. Evidence compiled, organized, and packaged for maximum impact. The timestamp on Michael's professional misconduct was irrefutable, from documented bribery in the Davidson case, evidence tampering in State v. Reynolds, to procedural violations across 7 other felony prosecutions. James clicked send on the first email. Assistant District Attorney Helen Martinez would receive it precisely as she arrived at her desk. The office's most ethical prosecutor, her reputation for incorruptibility made her the perfect primary target. The evidence would horrify her professional sensibilities. The tactical timeline proceeded with methodical inevitability. 730. Package 2 delivered to State Bar Association investigators. 815. Financial documentation to the county auditor. By 0900, the professional siege around Michael would be fully established. James's phone vibrated. Text from Marcus, his former squad mate, now working in digital security. Email access confirmed. Subject has opened primary documentation package. Response indicates significant distress. Forwarding to superiors already initiated. First objective achieved. James allowed himself exactly 10 seconds of satisfaction before focusing on Phase 2. Sarah's exposure required different tactical considerations. This wasn't about professional misconduct, but personal betrayal on multiple fronts. The family. Gathering at Sarah's parents' home provided optimal timing. Sunday brunch, 1100 hours, all witnesses present. James had conducted thorough reconnaissance through mutual friends. Sarah's sister Emily would be there, along with both parents and 2 aunts, all previously kept ignorant of Sarah's systematic financial deception. His package to the family was comprehensive. Banking records showing Sarah's theft from the family. Business, transfer documentation linking her to the second mortgage fraud. And text message logs revealing her explicit planning with Michael to maximize financial damage to James during his deployment. James checked his watch. 9:45. He reached for his secure phone, the one unknown to Sarah or Michael, and dialed Emily. "It's time," he said when she answered. Their conversation lasted precisely 3 minutes. Emily had discovered Sarah's betrayal months ago, but lacked concrete evidence. Now she had everything needed to execute the family confrontation. At 10:20, James's phone lit up with the first tremors of impact. Michael's assistant calling in barely concealed panic. "James, there's people from the state attorney general's office here. They're seizing files and Michael's computer. He's demanding to know what you did." James maintained tactical discipline. "I simply provided evidence of professional misconduct to the appropriate authorities. The rest is standard investigative procedure." 3 more calls followed in rapid succession. Michael's law partner, Sarah's father, the family attorney. Each conversation brief, professional, revealing nothing beyond necessary acknowledgement. At 11:47, the first visual confirmation arrived. Security footage from Marcus showing Michael being escorted from the courthouse, face contorted in undisguised rage. Sarah's simultaneous meltdown at her parents' home was reported by Emily via text, complete with documentation of her confession when confronted with the evidence. James reviewed his operational checklist. Primary objectives achieved, secondary targets engaged, collateral impact minimized. Emma safely with his parents, protected from the immediate fallout. Intelligence gathering, systems in place to monitor responses and counterattacks. The veteran allowed himself a single deep breath. Phase 1 completed successfully. The precision of execution reflected years of mission planning and tactical discipline. This wasn't emotional revenge but strategic justice. Michael and Sarah had unleashed this response through their own actions, their own choices. Tonight he would call Emma to maintain the stability she desperately needed. Tomorrow would bring Phase 2, the custody evidence package already prepared for submission to family court. The documented neglect, the parental alienation attempts, the fabricated accusations. James closed his laptop, securing all evidence backups per established protocol. The first strike had landed with devastating accuracy. The targets were in disarray, their defenses compromised, their support networks now turned against them. Just as he'd planned, the Special Forces axiom echoed in his mind. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Patience, precision, persistence, the same qualities that had kept him alive in combat, were now serving justice in civilian life. Phase 1, complete. Phase 2, imminent. The operation continued. The first shot in a counteroffensive always reveals your opponent's defensive posture. James Cooper thought as he reviewed the frantic text messages flooding his phone. 36 hours after initiating Phase 1 of his strategic response, the enemy was showing clear signs of disorganization. Michael's increasingly desperate voicemails betrayed the prosecutor's crumbling professional facade, while Sarah's social media meltdown provided additional intelligence on her deteriorating position. James maintained his tactical discipline. Seated at his kitchen table with mission documentation precisely arranged before him. 3 laptops displayed different surveillance feeds: his attorney's office parking lot, the courthouse entrance, and the cafe where Sarah was currently meeting with her divorce lawyer. The pattern was unfolding exactly as forecasted during his strategic planning sessions with former Staff Sergeant Wilson. Targets are mobilizing countermeasures, James noted into his digital recorder, his voice maintaining the same calm precision that had kept his Special Forces team alive during the Kandahar extraction mission. Subject Michael attempting to leverage remaining judicial contacts. Subject Sarah initiating social character assassination protocols. The encrypted messaging app on his primary laptop pinged. Lieutenant Rodriguez, now working in the State Attorney General's office, had forwarded internal communication showing Michael desperately calling in favors from colleagues. Each panicked request created another documentation point, another witness to potential obstruction charges. James allowed himself a small, controlled smile, the first breach in his neutral expression since launching the operation. Military discipline had replaced emotional reaction. Strategic thinking had supplanted rage. His opponents had mistaken his calculated patience for weakness. The veteran's phone rang. "It is Detective Harrison from the Financial Crimes Unit." "They took the bait, Cooper." Harrison's voice carried the satisfaction of a professional watching a carefully laid trap close. "Your brother-in-law just tried to access and alter digital records related to the Johnson case. System flagged it exactly like you predicted. Timeline consistent with operational assessment," James replied, updating his mission log with precise notation. "Any attempt to contact witnesses yet?" 3 calls to prosecution witnesses in the last hour. All recorded per your advance arrangement with their attorneys. James ran his hand along the scar on his forearm, a remainder of shrapnel taken during his 3rd deployment. The physical pain had been nothing compared to finding Sarah and Michael together, but his military training had taught him something civilians rarely understood. Emotional pain, like physical pain, could be compartmentalized, analyzed, and utilized. The surveillance feed from the cafe showed Sarah gesturing angrily, her divorce attorney's body language revealing growing concern. James had anticipated this phase, the moment when legal counsel realizes their client has withheld critical information. The veteran had provided just enough evidence to the opposing attorney to create professional doubt without revealing his full intelligence portfolio. A tactical alert chimed on his secondary laptop. Michael had initiated emergency fund transfers from 3 separate accounts. The financial tripwires James had established with his banking contact were functioning perfectly, documenting each panicked transaction. "Sir, we've got movement at the courthouse," former Corporal Bennett reported through the secure channel. Target Michael is attempting to access case files after hours. Security protocols activated as you arranged. The digital chessboard was revealing every move exactly as James had forecasted during countless late-night strategy sessions. His opponents, accustomed to manipulating a system they thought they controlled, were now finding every escape route systematically closed. James's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter Emma's teacher. Sarah had just called the school, attempting to remove Emma early without following the court-mandated protocols. Another documented violation for the custody file, the veteran access to secure cloud server, initiating the release of Phase 2 documentation to selected recipients. The evidence packet detailing Michael's witness manipulation would reach the Judicial Review Board precisely as the prosecutor was violating department protocols in real time. Targets are accelerating their response timeline, James noted clinically. Emotional factors compromising their operational security. Outside his window, James watched as the autumn leaves fell in lazy spirals. His military training had taught him that patience was often the deadliest weapon. His opponents had chosen to interpret his strategic withdrawal as defeat, his intelligence gathering as inaction. They were about to discover what every adversary who had underestimated his Special Forces unit had learned the hard way. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who strikes first, but the one who strikes according to a meticulously prepared battle plan. The last piece of evidence landed on Assistant State Attorney General Catherine Mercer's desk with the precision of a tactical strike. James Cooper stood at parade rest, his military bearing unchanged despite the civilian clothes. 3 manila folders precisely aligned, color-coded tabs visible. Professional, methodical, overwhelming. "This completes the documentation, ma'am," James said, voice steady. The same tone he'd used during mission debriefs in Kandahar. Financial records, witness statements, and audio recordings, all admissible, all verified. Mercer's eyes widened as she scanned the contents. Prosecutor Michael Reeves has been operating like this for years? Affirmative. Page 34 contains the timeline of case manipulations. Page 56 details the financial transactions through shell accounts. My brother-in-law's arrogance made him sloppy. Across town, Michael's phone buzzed. Text from a courthouse contact. His face drained of color. The AG's office is requesting all my case files. All of them. Sarah looked up from the kitchen counter, the smugness she'd worn for months suddenly faltering. What does that mean? It means someone's talking. Michael's voice cracked, composure slipping. He'd never faced this level of scrutiny. James moved through the courthouse with tactical awareness, acknowledging the nods from security personnel. Veterans looking out for veterans. The family court supervisor, Colonel Jenkins, retired, had reviewed the custody documents personally, found the manipulations immediately. The systematic campaign of parental alienation now fully documented. Filing. For emergency custody review, his attorney Diane Martinez confirmed. Former JAG officer who understood exactly how to navigate the system. Judge Anderson has the complete evidence package. Your daughter's teacher's testimony was particularly compelling. James checked his watch. 1,430 hours. Phase 3 of the operation commencing precisely on schedule. At the prosecutor's office, the administrative seal appeared on Michael's door as Internal Affairs began their investigation. Computer seized, files boxed, credentials suspended. The professional dismantling of a career built on corruption. 15 cases with evidence tampering, the investigator reported. 7 with documented witness intimidation. And financial records showing patterns consistent with bribery. Michael's attorney, sweating through his designer suit, stammered about procedural violations. Nobody was listening. Your husband did this, Michael hissed into his phone, pacing his living room. He was supposed to be broken. He was supposed to be finished. Sarah's panic accelerated as her own phone lit up with notifications. Family members, friends, the bank. The carefully constructed facade crumbling with each message. "Mrs. Cooper," the financial crimes investigator began. "We have documentation of fraudulent signatures on multiple loan applications. The penalties for identity theft and financial fraud are quite severe." James sat in the park across from Emma's school, perfectly positioned with line of sight to all approaches, alert but calm. His battle rhythm established through months of disciplined preparation. "Daddy!" Emma's voice carried across the playground as she spotted him. The genuine joy in her expression validated everything. The judge granted the emergency custody order, Martinez confirmed through his earpiece. "Sheriff's deputies are serving it now. Your daughter stays with you pending the full hearing." Sarah arrived at the school 20 minutes later, face contorted with rage when she found the sheriff's deputy waiting instead of Emma. The custody papers were served with professional courtesy. The same courts she'd manipulated are now turning against her. "This isn't over," she threatened, the words hollow against the weight of evidence. James watched from his position, maintaining tactical distance. The veteran in him recognized a neutralized threat when he saw one. Back at the state attorney general's office, the case against Michael expanded. Former colleagues coming forward, cases being reopened. Victims finding their voice against the prosecutor who'd betrayed his oath. "The disbarment proceedings will begin next week," Mercer confirmed, reviewing the final documentation. "Criminal charges to follow. This level of corruption, it's unprecedented." James nodded, emotions carefully controlled. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice, about consequences, about the restoration of order against those who believed themselves above it. In his apartment, Michael frantically shredded documents as the walls closed in. Too little, too late. The evidence was already secured. The tactical advantage lost months ago. James returned to his new apartment, Emma chattering happily beside him. The small two-bedroom was nothing like the house he'd lost, but it was secure, stable. A foundation for rebuilding. On the refrigerator door, a simple checklist. Professional, methodical, nearly complete. The final execution phase of an operation planned with military precision. Not with violence, but with something far more devastating to opponents who relied on manipulation and deceit. The unvarnished truth, strategically deployed when they least expected it. Silence filled courtroom 3B as Judge Hamilton reviewed the final custody documents, his experienced eyes moving methodically through pages that represented 18 months of James Cooper's strategic patience. Emma sat in the witness room down the hall, protected from the proceedings by a court-appointed advocate. James maintained parade rest, his special forces training evident in his perfect posture, despite the emotional weight of the moment. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court awards full custody of minor child Emma Cooper to her father, James Cooper, effective immediately. The judge's gavel punctuated the declaration with military precision. Mrs. Cooper's visitation will be supervised until completion of mandatory parenting classes and financial responsibility training. Sarah's face contorted, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the tactical precision of James's legal campaign. "Your Honor, this is a mistake. He manipulated Mrs. Cooper." Judge Hamilton's voice cut through her protest like a combat knife. "The evidence of your systematic parental alienation attempts and financial malfeasance is extensively documented. I suggest you focus on complying with court orders rather than extending this matter further." James nodded imperceptibly, the subtle acknowledgement of a mission objective achieved. His attorney Davidson, a retired officer who'd volunteered his services after hearing James's story through the veteran network, collected their documents with the organized efficiency of a field operation. "Status report on Michael?" James asked quietly as they exited the courtroom, maintaining situational awareness as the press gathered in the hallway. The State Bar Association completed disbarment proceedings yesterday, Davidson confirmed. The Attorney General's office has filed 7 counts of evidence tampering, 3 counts of witness intimidation, and multiple financial crimes. Bail hearing scheduled for 09:00 tomorrow. The systematic dismantling of Michael's legal career had been executed with the same precision James had once applied to high-value target operations. Each piece of evidence carefully secured and deployed for maximum effect. Each witness approached through proper channels. Each legal filing timed for optimal impact. Outside the courthouse, James's former squad leader Martinez waited with Emma, the man's protective posture around the 8-year-old, demonstrating why James had entrusted her security to him during court proceedings. "Daddy!" Emma broke free, running toward him. James knelt to her level, catching her with steady arms that had once secured extraction zones under enemy fire, but now served a more important mission. "Operation Homecoming complete, princes," he said, their private code bringing a smile to her face. "We're going home." Martinez handed James a tablet displaying news coverage. Michael's professional disgrace now occupied front pages across the state. The prosecutor who'd tried to use his position to destroy a decorated veteran now faced his own judicial reckoning. "Financial recovery progressing as planned," Martinez reported. "VA housing secured. Job offers from 3 security consulting firms, all veteran-owned. Support network standing by for transition assistance." James nodded, scanning the tactical situation one final time. Sarah remained by her car, isolated. Her social network evaporated as former friends recognized her systematic betrayal of a deployed soldier. Her financial resources were depleted by legal fees and court-ordered restitution. The family that had once embraced her now maintained a security perimeter of careful distance. "You could have destroyed them faster," Martinez observed as they walked toward the vehicle. "Gone public immediately. Created maximum chaos." James shook his head. "That would have been emotional. Undisciplined." He secured Emma in the back seat with practiced movements. "Strategic patience achieves superior tactical outcomes. We learned that in Kandahar. The systematic approach had required military discipline, especially during the darkest moments when emotional responses would have compromised operational security. Each phase executed according to plan. Intelligence gathered, verified, and deployed through proper channels. Legal and financial battles fought on carefully selected terrain. "Ready for Phase 4, sir?" Martinez asked with the hint of a smile. James nodded, starting the engine. "Phase 4, rebuilding." The complete reconstruction of his and Emma's life. Supported by the same veteran network that had provided tactical assistance throughout the operation. The mission wasn't about destruction. It was about securing the primary objective, his daughter's future. "Mission parameters updated, Martinez. Strategic objective achieved. Proceeding to long-term deployment." Emma giggled from the back seat. Already recovering under her father's structured care. The disciplined approach that had served in combat had proven equally effective against domestic enemies. Tactical precision had achieved what emotional revenge never could. Complete and sustainable victory. James Cooper, Special Forces veteran, drove away from the courthouse without looking back. The military precision that had made him an elite soldier had protected what mattered most when the battle came to his home front. Mission accomplished.